guessing that was anybody here in the OR that was here before? No. I'm guessing they left donuts because there are like donut boxes all the way up here. Well, having the chairs everywhere is definitely going to make today a little bit more difficult. Okay, so this is where we stopped last time, I believe. We were talking about the questions of the First Amendment, and we're beginning this exploration of civil liberties and civil rights. And we talked about the fact that there are 5 or 6 freedoms located in the First Amendment, and we're going to be spending today and Friday talking about those. Hopefully also get to the Second Amendment on Friday. We'll see how it goes. And the reason why I argue that we have 5 or 6 is because when you read the First Amendment, one of the things that you realize is that there are 2, not 1, freedoms of religion. And I think I made the argument last time that one of the biggest problems that people have, and I found that this is actually a bigger problem among people who are evangelical, who are very religious, than it is for people who are not religious, is that these 2 different freedoms of religion kind of work at cross purposes with one another. One of the freedoms of religion argues that the government may not establish a church, and the fact that it may not establish a church greatly limits the ability of the government to get involved in religious affairs. The other one, however, argues that the government may not prevent religious practice, and because it may not prevent religious practice, the government is prohibited from getting involved in religious affairs. So if a person of faith wants to practice their faith, the government is not allowed to stop them. At the same time, the government may not get involved in encouraging or establishing a church. So what I want to do today is I want to see kind of how well y'all understand this idea, and then talk a little bit about what it means, okay? So we're going to be doing that A, B, C, D thing that we've done before, where you're going to have to get up and kind of be mobile. I'm going to give you guys some examples of some things. And as I'm giving you the examples, I'm also going to be talking you through some concepts that are in the textbook. So if you want to carry your notebook with you or your cell phone to take down notes, you're welcome to. But keep in mind that the important key terms are in your notes. Also, we record these, and so you can go back and look at them later. So here's what we got. Oh, we also talked about this slide, right? The reason why we have this, I believe we covered that in 2. The first thing that you need to understand is that we have a doctrine in the United States that we call the doctrine of separation. And the doctrine of separation refers to that first clause. Now, the idea behind doctrine, it's like ideology. And those of you who, did we talk about this slide? I don't think we got to this slide in class on Monday. We didn't get to this one, did we? Nope. This is the first time y'all seen this one? Oh, I guess y'all don't remember anyway. So when we talk about doctrine, we're talking about like this philosophy that we use to understand the law. Right? In the same way that you have an ideology that helps you understand your culture, or that helps you understand the world around you, a doctrine helps us to understand the law. If you grew up in a church, or if you grew up in a faith tradition, your faith tradition, much like the law, is governed by a series of doctrines. Catholics believe in a doctrine called transubstantiation. Protestants mostly believe in something called consubstantiation. There are some Protestants that do believe in transubstantiation, mostly Episcopalian or Lutherans. But the question is, when Jesus said, "This is my body, this is my blood," during the very first communion, did he transform bread and wine into flesh and blood, or is it a metaphor? The doctrine of transubstantiation says that it was transformative. The doctrine of consubstantiation says it is metaphorical, right? This may not matter, but to some people it's really big. Another theological doctrine that you might be familiar with: who determines whether or not you go to heaven or hell? There is, among some Christians, a doctrine called predestination, which has two different approaches. One argues that God picked winners and losers before the beginning of time. The other argues that God simply knew who the winners and losers were before the beginning of time and wrote all the winners' names down in a book. Predestination. Others argue that you're in complete control, and at any moment, you can choose God. Right? A different philosophy. It's really, really important on how you practice faith and how you build your church. The same thing's true with the law. Judges have doctrines based upon whether they have loose or rigid interpretations of the Constitution, based upon whether they have living document interpretations or literal interpretations or original interpretations. And so the doctrine that's important for the first clause is called the doctrine of the wall of separation. Now, it's important that you understand Thomas Jefferson did not invent this term. However, when Thomas Jefferson was president, he had received a letter from a group of Baptists, the Danbury Baptist Association. And in his response to this letter, Thomas Jefferson says, look, what we cannot do is we cannot have a nationally mandated requirement for daily prayer. And that was the specific question that the Danbury Baptists were asking. Can we require by law daily prayer? There are countries where daily prayer is a requirement. A couple of Christian countries, a lot of Muslim countries where daily prayer is a requirement by law if you participate in the dominant faith. Jefferson said we cannot do that, and here's the reason why. What the Establishment Clause does, according to Jefferson, and every court that has considered this since Thomas Jefferson wrote that letter, is it creates a wall of separation. Religion is on one side. Government is on the other. And when I'm talking about religion, you have to understand that I'm talking about the institution of religion and the institution's ability to dictate religious practice to you. This is what his letter argues. This wall of separation means that the government cannot go in and create a church. It also means that the government cannot go in and do the things or require the things that churches would do or require. Not allowed to do it. We've created this thing called the Lemon test. And a test is exactly like the test that I give you. I want to know whether or not you've actually learned anything. So I give you a test. And whenever I give you a test, I ask you some questions. I give you some prompts. And then I wait for your response. And what the judges will do is they'll say, okay, if you have a case about religion, I am going to ask you some questions, and I'm going to give you time to give me a response. And you're going to give me that response in a written form, a written brief. You're also going to come in front of the United States Supreme Court and give what is called an oral argument. And during the oral arguments, the judges are going to ask you questions. They're going to test you. Now, the test that we've developed in the United States is called the Lemon test. It comes from a court case called Lemon versus Kurtzman, really original. This is 1971. So this was 50 years ago. A little over 50 years ago, almost 51, because the case came down early in the calendar year. But a little over 50 years ago, the court said, look, this is how we're going to understand religion, based upon this doctrine of the wall of separation. So here's my question to you. Based upon everything that I've just told you, I want you to think about, I want you to test this argument using the wall of separation. If you're an A, I want you to kind of go over there and hang out in that part of the room. If you're a B, back there. If you're a C, you're going to be back there. If you're going to be a D, you're going to kind of be up here, right? If you're an E, just sort of chill in the middle between the D's and the C's. And there's a reason for that, right? A, B, C, or D, or E. So here's the question that I want you to think about. When is it constitutional for the 10 or 11 commandments to be displayed on public grounds? Now, by public grounds, we're talking about ground that is owned by the government. This is a private institution. We can do whatever we want. You have a private home. You can do whatever you want. You're a private person. You can carry whatever you want. What we're asking is, if the government wants to put the 10 or the 11 commandments on government-owned land, are they allowed to? based upon this doctrine of the wall of separation. Okay? Does everybody understand the question? Are you allowed to put the 10 or 11 commandments? Okay. Option A, you are never allowed to do it. If you believe that there are no circumstances under which the government can post the 10 or 11 commandments on public property, you want to stand over here. Option B, back in the corner. You're never allowed to do it, but not because of the Establishment Clause. You think it's because of the Free Exercise Clause, which we haven't really talked about much yet. But you say that, look, it's not that we can't do it because of the establishment reason, it's because we can't do it for the free exercise reason, okay? And that's B. Option C, back there in the corner. You can do it, but only if it's not about God. Do you know what the word secular means? Are y'all all familiar with the word secular? The word secular. So we consider there to be, when we're talking about religion, there's this line. On one end of the line are things that are very, very, very religious. We know they're religious because they are sacred and because they are shared. Okay? So if you have an object that is sacred, and because it's sacred, you're not allowed to use it except under religious reasons. If you have a practice that is sacred, you're only allowed to do it for religious reasons. We consider this to be a sacred thing. We would consider that to be part of religion. It's sacred because you also do it with other people. These are two things that you have to have a religion. It has to be sacred, and it has to be shared with others. If it's not sacred, it's not about God. Not really. And if it's not shared, it's about you and not us. Therefore, it can't be religion. Does that make sense? You know, with me? On the other hand, we have things that are secular. Things that are secular have nothing sacred about them, which means they can be used anywhere you want to, anytime you want to, and also, they are only about you. It's entirely about yourself. And it can do either one of those things. It can be something that's shared, like secular music. On my way in, Kanye was on the radio. Secular music, right? Actually, Kanye did a sacred album of religious music. His last album that he released, I believe, was an album of gospel music. And you shouldn't play gospel music when you're at a rave. Not really kind of how that goes. But nonetheless, he has these two different types of music. You understand the difference, sacred and secular. So could I make an argument that the 10 Commandments has a secular function? It's not about religion, and it's not about or it's not about us. So the 10 Commandments has a personal function, or that the 10 Commandments is a secular object, not about God, but about the state. That's C. Does everybody understand that? You get the difference between sacred and secular? Cool. D, you can do it, but only if everyone is Christian. Because if everybody is Christian, there's nobody to object. If nobody objects, then it's okay. Okay? And I'll tell you what, if you're an E person, let's go ahead and bring you over here. I'm not sure how many E people there are. E, you can do it for all of those reasons. That if you were to consider the courts would tell you that all those things are true. Okay. Does everybody understand the question? Does everybody understand the 5 options? All right, go vote. What do you think is true? I don't know if I want to make it the entire day without eating a donut. I just don't know if that's going to happen. There were a group of C's, and they all collapsed. Must have been a very persuasive C. Okay, so where is my line between the A's and the B's? So you guys are the A's, and then you guys are all B. I don't have anybody C's. Somebody from the A camp, why do you think that they can never post the 10 Commandments? Yep.
I personally believe in like complete separation of church and state.
Yep.
I don't
Okay. Okay. Do you think anything that the courts would agree with you? Okay. Anybody else? Why do you think that you can never post the 10 Commandments? Anyone else? Okay. You guys who are B's. So their establishment folks, your free exercise folks, what about the 10 Commandments has to do with inhibiting practice? Okay. So if you could think about like by having it displayed, am I intimidating other people and limiting their ability to practice? Right? So if I'm in a red state, if you roll up into a red state and you're a Muslim or you're Buddhist or you're Confucian, and you see all these public displays of Christianity on all the public buildings, are you going to feel intimidated and therefore not display your own faith? Okay. Let me see what my next slide is. So here's what Lemon versus Kurtzman says. Lemon versus Kurtzman asks a three-part question. And that's not 1968, that's 1971. I don't know why that date's up there. The first question is, does the reason why we have this thing posted represent a secular or a religious value? Now, back in 1990, 92, 96, 96, two things happened at the exact same time in two different parts of the world. Here in Kentucky, there was a judge in a county about 30 miles, 45 miles from here. And the county judge said, you know what I would like to do? I would like to remind all of the citizens of my county that our county is built upon Christian values. And so what that judge did to remind all of the citizens of his county and anybody who walks in that this is a Christian community is he had the 10 Commandments posted by the front door of the county circuit court. And this case comes before the United States Supreme Court, and they asked the lawyers for this person, why did he do it? He did it for religious reasons. And if he did it for religious reasons on public property, you think it's okay? And the attorney said yes. And the judges said no. It is not okay for you to intentionally remind everyone that we are a Christian community, and when you walk in here, you have Christian values. A few years later, there was actually a Supreme Court judge for the Supreme Court of the state of Alabama. He had a statue erected and had it put at the front door of the Alabama Supreme Court building. The Supreme Court ordered it removed, and he was impeached. He ran for re-election and won. He put it back in place. He was impeached for the second time. He decided to run for Senate from the state of Alabama, and he actually lost because they had enough of him. But nonetheless, at the exact same time that Kentucky case was happening, back in 1954, a group called the Knights of Columbus. If you're Catholic, you've probably heard of them. If you're Protestant, a group called the Knights of Columbus got on this kick. And as part of this kick, what they wanted to do was they wanted to remind everyone that we were founded based upon Christian principles. Not that we are currently Christian, but that the source of our country was Christian principles. They're the reason why you say under God in the Pledge of Allegiance now. You didn't do it before 1954. That was the Knights of Columbus. They got all busy with it, and they convinced Eisenhower that this is a good idea. But prior to 1954, we didn't say under God in the pledge. So if you're like a traditional, we can only do things the old way, take it back out again, because it was really supposed to be there originally. But in 1954, they went to the state legislature in the state of Texas, and they said to the state legislature, is it true that our law is based upon Christian beliefs? What is the answer to that question? Is our law in 1954 particularly based upon Christian beliefs? If you wanted to find the origins of our principles, Could you find many or most of them in the Bible? So what we want to do is we want to erect a small plaque. It's about yay tall. Comes up about your knees, a little bit higher. And we want to put it next to the chaplain's parking spot. And we want to put it on the grounds of the state Capitol building. Now, if you've ever been to the Capitol building in Kentucky and you've walked through the Capitol building, there are statues for a whole bunch of stuff and plaques for a whole bunch of stuff. Same thing's true in Texas. If you go, they've got a statue, I kid you not, there's a statue commemorating all the Boy Scouts in Texas who died in the line of duty. Not firemen, yeah, absolutely. Police, totally. Every soldier in every war that's ever been fought, including the Indian Wars, completely. All those are there. They also have one for the Boy Scouts that died in the line of duty, because apparently there were a couple of kids who got shot while playing with guns as Boy Scouts. I'm not making that up. And the courts looked at this and said, well, what is the purpose of these two plaques? And they said, it's to remind us that when our country was founded, our origins of our laws included Christian principles. Well, that's true. And reminding people of your history is a secular, not a sacred act. And so the court said, we're going to let that go. And then the courts also consider something called the endorsement clause. They say that government cannot endorse religion. And then they asked the attorneys, well, by placing a plaque next to the chaplain's parking spot in the parking lot, is that endorsing religion? Is it saying that we need to continue to be religious? Or is it merely saying that we were once based upon Christian values? It's about the past. Okay, then I'm not endorsing future activity. The third category is entanglement. Those statues had been there since 1954. People had forgotten about them. If the chaplain parked, you couldn't even see them. Are they going to do anything to interact government in the future with religion? No. So they're still there. Because the courts ruled they had a sacred purpose reminding you of the past. They didn't do anything about the future. And because they didn't actually entangle anything. But the ones in Kentucky, that was about reminding people in the future of something. Those were brand new. Those had to go. And so if you have an old set of the 10 Commandments lying around in government property, you can probably get away with it. But if they're new, you can't. Does that make sense? Okay, let's do another one. Does the federal government have the authority to prevent animal sacrifices? If you're true, since y'all are already up against that wall, we'll just go ahead and keep you there. If you're true, come down here and hang out. Yes, you believe the government does have the authority. If it's false, if you think, no, the government cannot prevent animal sacrifices in the name of religion, come up here and hang out. Did you have a question, or are you? Okay. Oh man, this is an A, B, C, and D question. I thought this was a true or false question. Okay, I'm gonna have to do this over again. A, no, they do not have the authority. Sorry, my bad. Old slide. A, they do not have the authority. B, they have the authority to prevent animal sacrifices, but only if the animal is being tortured. C, yes, they do have the ability to stop animal sacrifices, but only for certain types of animals, ones that we would consider to be pets. And if you're a D, come up here, yes, the government can prevent animal sacrifices. I almost embarrassed myself there. Almost completely prevented my point. So A, no, the government cannot stop it. B, no, they cannot stop it, but only depending on how the sacrifice takes place. C, yes, they can stop it, but only for like dogs and cats. And D, yes, they can entirely. All right, go vote. Where are you at? Can the government prevent animal sacrifice? Do y'all know what animal sacrifice is? I'm sorry? D, right up there. D is that the government can stop animal sacrifices if they want to. Well, it's the question. Can they pass a law saying that you're not allowed to sacrifice animals in the name of God? That's the question in D. Do y'all all understand the question? I've got some puzzled looks on my face. Yep. Correct. So no, they can't stop it for any reason. You're allowed to sacrifice animals. B is no, you can't stop animal sacrifice unless the way that you're sacrificing the animal is torture. We can consider torture. So think about the difference between two ways that I could sacrifice an animal. Does anybody know how they engaged in animal sacrifices in the Old Testament? Anybody remember the story of Abraham and his son Isaac? And how would you kill them? You would take a knife, you would slit their throat, you would bind them first because you don't want them running away. You would slit their throat, you would let them bleed out, and then you would burn them in sacrifice. Is it torture to slit an animal's throat? I mean, it's going to hurt a little bit. They're going to be dead, but not particularly torturous. What if I took a baseball bat with me and I tied it up, I tied it down, and I beat it up upside the head repeatedly until eventually it died? Is that torturous? Oh, probably, right? So what B is asking is, if you torture the animal to kill it, then the government can stop you because torture is bad. But the fact that you're committing the animal sacrifice, the government can't stop you because animal sacrifice is okay. That's what B is. C is that, yes, they can prevent animal sacrifice, but they can't do it for all animals. That they can prevent animal sacrifice, but there are only some types of animals that they can say no. And D is, yes, absolutely, animal sacrifice is bad. Come on, people. Like, we ain't getting medieval up in here anymore. No more animal sacrifices. Are you happy with your locations? A, B, C. So which one are you? You're C. You're C. You're B. B, 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 B. A. Why are you guys C's? Hmm. Okay. Yep. Okay. All right. I like it. Y'all who are B's, why are y'all B's? What makes you B? Are you sure you're a B? Why are you a B? One of the things that we do with our political science majors, by the way, some people call this torture. As a practice in political science, we force students to talk in public because political science is, at the end of the day, a leadership degree, and it's hard to lead people if you can't talk to them in public. So if you don't want to talk in public, that's fine. Take more political science classes. You're not going to have a choice. It'll be a graded assignment. A. Why are you guys A's? Why can't I not sacrifice an animal to Baal?
I personally am in like the D camp because I animals, and I don't like the idea of them getting sacrificed.
Okay.
But it would be hypocritical of me to go B over there with the D's.
Sure.
Because, like I said earlier, I believe in separation of church and state. Church shouldn't be a part of the government, and to most extent, the government shouldn't be in the church.
Okay. What about the rest of you guys? Why are you guys A's? Any other positions on this? So let's, if I get this to work, I'll take a step back. One more time. So let's run through this lemon test. Okay. Part A. Is there a secular purpose for having a law banning animal sacrifices? Or am I only targeting religion? This is the first question that the court will ask. What is the secular purpose for banning animal sacrifice? So the court's question, do we allow animals to be killed for non-religious reasons? Sport hunting is legal. If you go hunting or if you go game fishing and you bag a deer, but you don't eat the meat, is the government going to come and hunt you down and throw you in jail? If you go quail hunting or dove hunting, which is huge back home in West Texas, are they going to go and hunt you down? Wild pigs. No, they'll probably thank you back home because wild pigs are a nuisance. I allow hunting for pure pleasure. How many of you are vegetarians? You don't eat meat. It's not that I don't like vegetarians. I just don't know if I trust them. No offense. I have some really good friends who are vegetarians. But you take a rack of ribs, like a rack of baby back ribs, and you slow smoke them for about 6 to 8 hours with some hickory smoke. And you put a little dry rub on them before you do. That's some good eating. Like I got to tell you. And a really good burger made with like good high quality Angus beef, man, that's really good. And I respect you. Like I appreciate that. And I've got some really good friends who are vegetarians. But if I'm going to let you kill an animal for the fun of it, and if I'm going to let you kill an animal for your own personal selfish consumption, why am I not going to let you kill an animal in the name of God? Right? This is the first question. By not allowing you to kill an animal in the name of God, but for other reasons, I'm clearly endorsing religious views where the killing of an animal is not okay for religious reasons. There are some religious practices where animal sacrifice is necessary. The court case, by the way, in which the animal sacrifice question was determined was a court case about Jewish law. It was about Hasidic law. And we've had another court case about halal law. Because in both of those practices, there is a bit of a religious part of the ceremony where you can only sacrifice the animal in a certain way, and a religious figure has to be present to bless the process. That's how it becomes kosher. That's how it becomes halal. And the law had been passed basically to prevent Jews from eating meat by banning the practice of making food kosher, or by preventing Muslims from eating meat by banning the practice of making food halal. That was the reason why this law was enacted. And the government's like, clearly that's religious. However, do I have a secular purpose to ban torture? Do I have a secular purpose to ban the taking out of an animal into the public square and beating it to death? In fact, if any of you know anything about psychology, one of the things that you know is that the earliest way for me to identify a psychopath or a sociopath is, do they torture animals when they're children? So yeah, I have a reason to ban torture. Absolutely. And so I can say torturing animals is not okay, but if you want to sacrifice in the name of God, it's perfectly acceptable. Oh, that's supposed to be B. Man, these slides are all messed up. Okay, here's another one. Is it constitutional to have prayer in public school? A, no, you may not have prayer in public school. B, no, schools may not have public prayer. Students, however, may not have, schools may not have public prayer, but students may. C, yes, you can have a public prayer in a school, but it has to be student-led. Okay? Do you understand the difference between B and C? B would be like, you're allowed to pray privately at your own desk, or you're allowed to pray with a group of your friends in the cafeteria. C is there's a school organized event, but only students are allowed to lead prayer worship at that school organized event. You see the difference? Some of you might have gone to schools that have something like called a baccalaureate service, where you go to the school, sends you to a church, and they bless your graduation. right? That if that was prayer led by a student, then that would be C. If it's prayer led by a faculty member or an administrator, that would be A, okay? And then D, yes, it is always constitutional to have prayer in school. All right, vote, A, B, C, or D. So I got a couple of A's. You're not allowed to pray in schools. I've got some B's. All of you guys are C's. No one's a D. Why are you guys C's? All right. What about you B's? Okay. The court case that governs this is called Santa Fe versus Doe, Santa Fe ISD versus Doe, 1996. The Santa Fe School District, they actually had a gun shooting in Santa Fe a few years ago. But Santa Fe ISD, like a lot of high schools, how many of you have ever been to a high school football game in the United States? You've been to high school? Okay. Did they have prayer before your high school football game? Okay. How many of you have ever been to a high school football game in Texas or in Florida? Yeah, that's a thing, right? Yeah. That's like a thing. You don't understand. I used to whenever I was in grad school, I would take my friends who were international students, and we would find a rivalry game week somewhere in the area, and I'd take it to them just so one time they could experience a Texas high school football game. So we went to this high school football game with them, and they're like, okay, whatever. Like we've been to soccer games in Europe, and I'm like, you don't get it. We went to the soccer game, or we went to this Texas high school football game. We roll up in this town, and all the lights had been turned out except for the stadium lights because everybody was at the football game. And we get to the football game, and literally, this is like a town of like 150 people, and they were playing another town of like 150 people, and there were 1,000 people in the stands because it wasn't just the people who lived in these two towns and their parents who played football. It was the entire community and everybody in both counties showing up. It was fantastic. And they opened the game with a prayer. Santa Fe ISD used to do this. And Doe's filed a lawsuit. And in the lawsuit, they said that if we go to this game and they lead prayer over the loudspeaker, then they're impinging upon our freedom because this is a violation of establishment. So Santa Fe ISD changed the policy. They had an election in the high school. And they asked the students, do you want to have school prayer before a football game? If you do, we will create a student council to be responsible for this prayer. Overwhelmingly, the students said yes. They then had an election where you get to vote to the people who are going to be on the student council. The council was chosen by the students. The student council then selected 5 people to be responsible for leading the prayer. These were all 5 members of the clergy. They were interdenominational. They had a couple of Protestants, they had a couple of Catholics, and they had a Jew. And they all took turns leading this prayer. The case goes to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court asked the question, when they led the prayer, did they lead the prayer using school-owned property? Well, yes, it was led over the loudspeaker. Can't do it. Now, when I was in high school, We had prayer. They still do. If you go to my high school, they still have prayer. And if somebody comes in and tries to stop them, God be with them. Because most of the people in the stands are armed. Just saying. Nonetheless, I went to the kind of high school that whenever my friends would show up during hunting season, they would take their ammunition into the principal's office and leave their shotguns in the car. That was the rule. Leave your gun in the car, lock your car, bring your ammunition inside, and we're all safe. And so my high school principal had a vault, had a safe in his office to put the shotgun shells in during bird season, or the rifle shells in. That's the kind of place that I went to school, right? Y'all might have been someplace similar. Anyway, we'd be in the locker room. And our coach would be giving his speech, go out there and here's our game strategy. Make sure you follow the strategy. Make sure you hit them really hard. We don't want anybody to have any permanent injury, but if a few people get knocked out of the game, you're doing it right? That kind of a thing that coaches always say before football games. And then our coach would say, Captain, the team is yours. And the coaches would walk out of the room. And the captain of the football team would stand up and Ethan would say, bow your heads. And everybody on the team bowed their heads, and the captain led us in prayer. We had more than one captain. Ethan was the one who everybody liked the most, but sometimes some others would do it. But we did that before every game. And then we ran out of the locker room and went and tried to kill somebody. The courts say that is okay because they're not using a loudspeaker. There are no faculty in the room. There are no teachers in the room. There are no coaches in the room. No administrators are making you do it. If you feel pressured by your classmates, that's perfectly okay. Perfectly okay. But you can't do it over the loudspeaker. 3 years ago, down in Tennessee, the football team did this thing. Y'all can sit down, by the way. I should have told you. The football team did this thing, except they went out onto the field to do it. And the coaches walked away, and they said to the captains, Captain, the team is yours. And one of the captains said, bow your heads. And whenever the captain said, bow your head, the defensive coordinator took his hat off and bowed his head. And the Supreme Court ruled that because the faculty member, because the coach participated with the students, that was endorsement. And that would put pressure on people in the building, people in the stands, people who are players. That's putting psychological pressure on them to participate. That's how close the line is. As long as the students are doing it, it is perfectly okay. But if there is anything from the school suggesting endorsement, if there's anything from the school suggesting pressure, if there's anything from the school suggesting that it's preferred, not allowed. That's the fine line. That's the difference between establishment and free exercise. Does that make sense? Any questions? And I opened this, and I mentioned this on Monday as well, that I think this is where a lot of my friends, especially the ones who are evangelical, this is where they run into trouble. Because they look at what happens at football games and say, we can't have prayer anymore. And they say the government's all up in our business. And it's like, no. You can still pray at football games. You just can't do it over the loudspeaker. Right? Like, everyone in the stands can say a prayer if you want to. You just can't have the school endorse it in any way. And if you want to call that attack on religion, you can, I guess. It's certainly an attack on the idea that our government should be endorsing or creating religion. Absolutely. But the government, at the same time, if you wanted to pray before a football game, the school district can't stop you. And if the coach says, if the captain says, everybody let's pray, and everybody on the team bows their heads, and the principal or the coach were to step in and say, y'all can't do that, the courts would fire them. But they can't say you should either, right? That's the difference. No for the school, yes for the students. All right, one quick thing before you guys go, and then we'll talk a little bit more about this on Friday, and we'll talk about a couple of other things. One more thing before you go. I've been using two words interchangeably, and I want to make sure that you notice that I've been using these two words. The word in the Constitution is establish, but I've also been using the word endorse. What the Supreme Court has argued is that logically the government can create a church or a faith for us to practice, or they can take one that already exists and say, we've adopted this one as our own. The effect is the same. But the word is literally establish. If you're a literalist, right? If you're a literalist, you look at the word establish and say, we're not creating a church. Christianity existed before the government did. And since the government's not creating this religion, it's okay for the government to endorse this religion because it's older than the government, because it is what we are based upon, because our forefathers had this belief before they ever created us. We can do that. It's fine. We're not establishing anything. But the courts have not taken this word literally to mean only establish. They've taken it intentionally to say what the founding fathers meant wasn't that they just couldn't create a new church the way that the Church of England was created, that the government can't endorse a church either, that the government can't make us all Anglican or it can't make us all Baptist. Because when our founding fathers wrote that word, they were worried about pre-existing religions, denominations fighting each other. And so they take that word intentionally, not literally. But a new set of judges could change their mind on that. And we actually think there's a really good chance at the current Supreme Court that they are, because they've made a lot of rulings recently that have allowed government to get into the business of endorsing religion again. There have been 3 or 4 things they've done that allow the endorsement of religion on the part of government. And so we think that that change might be happening as we speak. All right. Thank you, guys. I'll see you all on Friday.